The auctioneer looked at his watch. 9 o'clock. Exactly on schedule. Nearly 200 people had gathered beneath the old oak trees surrounding Bennett Ridge Farm. Some came hoping to buy land. Others came for the tractors, livestock, and equipment. A few simply came because everyone in the county knew this farm had been in the same family for almost 70 years. People whispered to each other, "It's a shame he finally decided to sell. I heard retirement got too expensive. My cousin says the old man couldn't handle the work anymore." Everyone had a theory. Every one of them was wrong. The auction brochure carried only a single sentence beneath the property description. "Owner has chosen to liquidate all agricultural assets." I stared at those words from inside my pickup truck parked nearly half a mile away. They weren't just lies. They were my son's lies. Because I had never agreed to sell a single acre. My name is Walter Dawson. I'm 78 years old. That morning, I watched strangers prepare to auction my life's work while believing I had willingly walked away from it. What none of them knew was this. 48 hours earlier, my own son had dragged me through the mud outside that farmhouse and left me in the rain like an unwanted animal. And standing beside him, laughing harder than anyone else, was my wife of 49 years. If you'd driven past Bennett Ridge Farm 20 years ago, you would have seen something different. Children chasing chickens, neighbors borrowing tractors, my grandson learning to drive an old pickup across the hay fields. The farm wasn't just where we lived, it was where our family happened. Every fence post carried a memory. Every barn beam reminded me of someone I'd loved. I promised my father on his deathbed I'd never sell the land, not because it was valuable, because once land leaves a family, it rarely comes back. I kept that promise for 43 years, until my own family decided promises no longer mattered. Everything changed after my son, Grant, returned from the city. He hadn't visited much over the years. Life was always too busy. Business meetings, investments, conferences. Then one spring morning, he suddenly arrived with expensive boots that had never touched mud. "Dad, I've got an incredible opportunity." I smiled. "Coffee first?" He smiled back. "We'll celebrate after you hear my idea." That should have been my first warning. Grant never celebrated anything that didn't make him money. Over the next hour, he spread colorful maps across my kitchen table, luxury cabins, fishing lodges, wedding venues, a private golf course. Every drawing covered my cornfields. He tapped the center of one blueprint. "This farm could make us millions." I quietly folded the papers. "It already makes me everything I need." His smile faded. "You're thinking too small." "No, I'm thinking like a farmer." He laughed. "There's no future in farming. There is if you're feeding people. There isn't if you're trying to become rich." I stood and carried the blueprints back to him. "I've already chosen my future." He didn't argue. He simply gathered the papers and left. Looking back, that silence frightened me more than shouting would have. For weeks, nothing happened. Grant stopped mentioning the land. My wife Denise even told me, "I think he's finally accepted your decision." I wanted to believe her. Instead, she'd simply started helping him. One evening I walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. Grant and Denise stopped talking the moment they saw me. The room became so quiet I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "What were you two discussing?" Denise smiled. "Garden flowers." Grant quickly changed the subject. "You should really think about replacing that old tractor." Neither of them looked me in the eyes. It was the kind of silence married people recognize immediately. Not comfortable silence, hidden silence. 2 weeks later, a real estate developer drove onto the farm without calling first. He introduced himself as Owen Parker. Nice suit, shiny truck, perfect smile. He extended his hand. "Dawson, it's an honor. I've admired this property for years." I didn't shake his hand. "I admire it too." He laughed politely. "I've prepared a very generous offer. I'm not selling." "You haven't even heard the number." "I don't need to." His smile disappeared. As he walked back toward his truck, he glanced at Grant standing on the porch. They exchanged a look. Just a look. But it told me something. This wasn't their first conversation. That night, I opened the old family safe inside my bedroom closet. The original property deed still rested exactly where my father had placed it decades earlier. Beside it sat another envelope, my will. I hadn't opened it in almost 5 years, for reasons I couldn't explain. I read every page. Then I called my attorney. "I'd like an appointment." "Everything all right, Walter? I think it's time I made a few changes." We agreed to meet on Friday morning. Nobody knew. Or at least, I believed nobody knew. Thursday evening brought the worst thunderstorm we'd seen all year. Rain hammered the roof. Wind bent the old maple trees nearly in half. I was locking the barn doors when headlights swept across the driveway. Grant climbed out of his truck. Denise followed close behind. Neither of them carried an umbrella. Grant walked straight toward me. "We need to talk. It can wait until morning." "No, it can't." His voice sounded different, calmer, almost emotionless. I looked toward the farmhouse. Every light inside had been turned off. The only sounds were rain and thunder rolling across the fields. Grant stepped closer, then quietly asked one final time, "Dad, are you selling me the farm?" I looked directly at him. My answer hasn't changed. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, Denise slowly smiled, and my son reached for my arm. His fingers wrapped around my coat sleeve. Not hard, not yet, just enough to stop me from walking back toward the barn. Rain poured between us like a curtain. I looked at his hand, then at his face. "Let go." Grant didn't move. "You've forced this." "I forced nothing. You forced me to run out of options." I almost laughed. "Son, you came here asking for millions. I offered you a future. You offered me hotels. I offered you security. I already had security." I pointed toward the barn. "The cattle, the wheat, the fields, the people who work this farm. That's security." Grant slowly tightened his grip. "No, that's nostalgia." Denise stepped beside him. Her rain-soaked hair clung to her face, but she didn't seem to notice. She folded her arms. "Enough. You've had your time. It's ours now." I stared at her. "Ours." She nodded. "You don't need 500 acres. You need a rocking chair." The words stung. Not because they were cruel, because they came from the woman who had once spent entire summers planting tomatoes beside me. The woman who used to say, "We'll grow old on this porch together." Now, she was talking about me as though I'd already left. I tried walking past them. Grant blocked my path. "Dade, just sign." He pulled several papers from a waterproof folder. Even in the rain, I immediately recognized what they were. Property transfer documents, already notarized, already prepared. Only one signature was missing, mine. "You planned this. We planned ahead. Without asking me, you would have said no." "I am saying no." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly. You've already promised my farm to someone else." His eyes widened. Only for a second, it was enough. I had guessed correctly. A black luxury SUV slowly rolled into the driveway. Its headlights illuminated the rain. A man in an expensive charcoal coat stepped out carrying a large umbrella. He wasn't dressed for farm work. He was dressed for closing business deals. Grant walked toward him. "Mr. Holloway, we're almost finished." The man smiled confidently. "I'll wait." Finished. They were speaking as though I had already agreed. I turned toward Denise. "Who is he?" She answered before Grant could. "Richard Holloway, the developer, the one buying the farm. So you've already accepted his money." She looked away. Grant answered instead. "The deposit, not the full payment. You accepted money for land that isn't yours. It will be." His certainty chilled me. I tore the paperwork in half, then into quarters. Rain carried the pieces across the muddy driveway. For several seconds, nobody moved. Grant looked down at the soaked paper scattered around his boots. Something inside him snapped. He grabbed both of my shoulders. "You don't get to ruin this. I built this place." "No, you inherited it." "I earned it." "You inherited every acre your grandfather and I spent our lives protecting." His breathing became heavier. "You care more about dirt than your own family. I care about honesty. I am your family." "No, my family would have never tried to steal from me." Without warning, he shoved me. I stumbled backward. My boots slipped in the mud. I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my left hip. Before I could sit up, Grant grabbed the back of my coat. Then he started dragging me. Across the driveway. Across wet gravel. Across thick mud. The back of my head struck loose stones. I shouted his name. He never stopped. The rain washed blood from a cut above my ear. My hands clawed helplessly at the soaked ground. "Grant," he kept pulling, like I wasn't his father, like I was another broken piece of equipment being hauled away. Denise followed a few steps behind. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trying to stop him. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she called out loud enough for everyone standing nearby to hear, "Sleep with the animals tonight." Richard Holloway smiled awkwardly. Even he looked uncomfortable. Grant dragged me all the way to the old cattle shelter. It hadn't housed livestock for years. The roof leaked. The wooden doors barely hung on their hinges. He threw me inside. I landed against an old feeding trough. Every joint in my body screamed. He dropped my jacket beside me, then looked down. "This is your last chance. Sell." I wiped muddy water from my face. "No." His shoulders rose and fell. Then he quietly said, "Tomorrow morning. The auction starts whether you're there or not." He slammed the barn door. A heavy chain rattled outside then. The unmistakable sound of a padlock clicking shut echoed through the empty shelter. One click, one decision, one betrayal I never believed my own son was capable of. For several minutes, I sat in complete darkness. Rain dripped steadily through holes in the roof. Cold wind pushed hay across the floor. I tried standing. Pain shot through my hip. I collapsed again. Then, from somewhere deep inside the abandoned cattle shelter, I heard another voice, very weak, almost a whisper. "Walter, is that really you?" I froze. I knew that voice. The problem was, the man it belonged to had supposedly died almost 12 years earlier. For several seconds, I forgot about the rain. Forgot about my aching hip. Forgot about the chain hanging outside the barn door. All I could think about was that voice. It couldn't be. I slowly turned toward the darkest corner of the shelter. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the voice came again. "We've both gotten older, Walter." My heart pounded. I grabbed an old lantern sitting beside the feeding trough. There was just enough fuel left to produce a weak yellow flame. I lifted it. The light spread across the barn, broken fencing, rotting hay, rusted farm tools. Then, I saw him. An elderly man sat wrapped in an old wool blanket near the back wall. Long gray beard, thin face, weathered hands. His left leg was missing below the knee. He smiled. "I wondered if you'd recognize me." The lantern nearly slipped from my hand. "Samuel." He nodded. "Samuel Granger, the farmer who owned the neighboring property. The same man everyone believed had died 12 years earlier after selling his land and moving away." I took one slow step toward him. "They said you were dead." Samuel chuckled. "They wanted people to believe that." I lowered myself onto an old wooden crate. Every movement hurt. "What happened?" Samuel stared at the leaking roof for several moments before answering. "My nephew happened." He gave a tired smile. "He wanted my land." The words hit me like another punch. My nephew convinced everyone I was suffering from dementia. He handled my finances, controlled my visitors. Then one day, I disappeared. You never told anyone. I tried, but nobody believed an old man with no documents. He looked around the abandoned shelter. "I've survived here and there ever since, working odd jobs, sleeping wherever I could, avoiding anyone who might recognize me. I stopped fighting." He shrugged. "Sometimes it's easier to disappear than convince people you're still worth listening to." The room became quiet again. Outside, rain continued pounding the roof. Samuel suddenly looked at me. "Your son?" I nodded. "He wants the farm." Samuel sighed. "They always start with money. Then, they convince themselves they're doing what's necessary. Eventually, they stop seeing you as family. They start seeing you as paperwork." His words sounded painfully familiar. I told him everything. Grant, Denise, the developer, the auction. Samuel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he slowly stood using a handmade wooden crutch. His balance wasn't perfect, but his eyes remained sharp. I frowned. "The door's chained." He smiled. "Not every door." Samuel led me toward what looked like an ordinary stack of old hay bales. He pushed several aside. Behind them, a narrow wooden hatch appeared beneath the floor. I stared. "How?" "I built this shelter." He laughed quietly. "Farmers always build more than one way out." He lifted the hatch. A narrow tunnel stretched beneath the barn, barely tall enough to crawl through. "When did you make this?" "Back in the 70s. Cattle thieves were becoming a problem. So I built emergency access to the creek." I couldn't help smiling. "You never told anybody." Samuel winked. "Good hiding places stay hidden." The crawl through the tunnel felt endless. Every movement sent pain through my bruised hip. Mud soaked my clothes. More than once I thought about stopping. Samuel kept encouraging me. "Almost there. You've survived worse." Finally, fresh air reached us. We climbed out beneath a line of cedar trees nearly 300 yards behind the barn. For the first time all night, I looked back toward my farm. Lights glowed inside the farmhouse. Grant, Denise, Richard Holloway, probably celebrating, believing I was still locked inside the cattle shelter, waiting for morning, waiting for the auction, waiting for me to disappear. Samuel quietly asked, "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the farmhouse. "I'm not running." "Good. Because they'll expect that. I'm stopping the auction." Samuel nodded. Oh, I haven't figured that out yet. Before either of us could say another word, headlights appeared on the distant county road. Not one vehicle. Two sheriff's cruisers, followed by a black luxury sedan. Samuel frowned, expecting visitors. I slowly shook my head. No, the black sedan stopped at the farmhouse. A woman stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. Even from that distance, I recognized her. My attorney, Helen Prescott. She wasn't supposed to arrive until the following afternoon, which meant only one thing. Someone had called her. The question was, who? And why was she arriving at my farm in the middle of the night? Just hours before the auction, I knew Helen Prescott well enough to recognize something was wrong before she even reached the porch. She never drove anywhere without calling first, especially not after dark. Yet there she was, stepping out of her sedan with a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick envelope in the other. Grant opened the front door. Even from across the pasture, I could see the surprise on his face. He hadn't expected her either. Samuel looked at me. Can you hear them? No, but I can read my son. Grant wasn't smiling anymore. Helen remained on the porch. She didn't go inside. She simply handed Grant the envelope. He opened it. Read the first page. His shoulders immediately stiffened. Denise took the papers from him. Her face lost all color. Richard Holloway reached for the documents next. Within seconds, the confident developer who'd spent months planning his luxury resort looked as though someone had punched him in the stomach. Samuel quietly whispered, "Whatever's in that envelope." They weren't expecting it. Helen turned and walked back toward her car. Grant hurried after her. Even from a distance, I could see him pleading. She calmly shook her head, got back into her sedan, and drove away, leaving all three of them standing in complete silence. I smiled for the first time since the rain began. I know exactly what she brought. Samuel raised an eyebrow. What? My father's contract. Back in 1982, my father had agreed to sell 30 acres along the southern fence line to a mining company. The sale never happened. The company went bankrupt before closing. Most people believed the contract became worthless. It didn't. Buried inside those forgotten papers was a clause my father insisted upon. If anyone ever attempted to commercially develop Bennett Ridge Farm, every surviving descendant working the land had to unanimously approve the sale. Every one of them. No exception. Samuel frowned. I thought Grant was your only heir. He isn't. Samuel looked confused. You never mentioned anyone else, because she never wanted the farm. 3 years earlier, my granddaughter Emily accepted a teaching job in Montana. She loved children, loved small towns, loved simple living. She told me many times, "Grandpa, I don't need land to love this place." So I never expected she'd become the person protecting it. Grant had forgotten one important detail. Emily was still a legal beneficiary under my father's original agreement. Without her written approval, no developer could buy a single acre. Not one. Grant didn't know that. Richard Holloway certainly didn't, but Helen did. The moment I called her about changing my will earlier that week, she reviewed every document my family had ever signed, including my father's forgotten contract. The envelope she delivered contained certified copies. The auction wasn't merely challenged. Legally, it couldn't happen. By sunrise, nearly 300 people had gathered for the auction. Farmers, neighbors, investors, equipment buyers. The auctioneer climbed onto the flatbed trailer serving as his stage. He adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," before he could continue. A sheriff's cruiser rolled across the field. Then another. Everyone turned. I stepped out of the passenger side, still wearing the same mud-covered clothes from the night before. A bruise darkened one side of my face. My jacket was torn. For several seconds, nobody spoke. One elderly neighbor removed his cap. Another whispered. I thought he agreed to sell. I slowly walked toward the trailer. Grant looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Denise took one step backward. Richard Holloway quietly folded his purchase agreement. He already knew. The deal was over. The sheriff climbed onto the trailer beside me. He spoke first. "This auction has been suspended by court order." A ripple moved through the crowd. The sheriff continued. "The county has also opened a criminal investigation into allegations of elder abuse, attempted unlawful property transfer, assault, and false imprisonment." The silence became absolute. Grant looked at me. "Dad," I raised my hand. "No. You don't get to call me that while asking strangers to sell the ground your grandfather bled for." Detectives escorted Grant and Denise away from the crowd. Neither resisted, neither spoke. As they passed me, Denise finally looked up. "I never thought you'd come back." I answered quietly. I never thought you'd laugh while your husband dragged me through the mud. She lowered her eyes. For the first time, there was no smile. Richard Holloway approached before leaving. I'm sorry. Were you part of it? No. I believed they had your permission. I studied his face. For once, I believed someone. He extended the property file toward me. I won't pursue this again. You shouldn't. There are places worth developing. I looked across the fields, and there are places worth protecting. He nodded, then walked away. Months later, the criminal trial ended. Grant was convicted of elder abuse, assault, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and conspiracy to illegally transfer property. Denise was convicted of the same offenses. Both received prison sentences. Neither inherited the farm, neither appealed. The evidence, including photographs of my injuries, the chained barn door, phone records, and testimony from Samuel Granger and several neighbors, left no room for doubt. The following spring, I signed exactly one document. Not a sales contract, a conservation agreement. Bennett Ridge Farm would never become a resort, never become a golf course, never become another subdivision. Long after I was gone, the land would remain farmland, protected forever. Emily eventually returned home, not because she wanted wealth, but because she wanted to teach local children where food came from, how crops were grown, and why family history mattered. Watching her walk the fields reminded me of my father. The promise I'd made beside his hospital bed had finally come full circle. One afternoon, a reporter asked me, Madre, Dawson, after everything your son did to you, what's the greatest revenge? I looked across the wheat fields swaying beneath the wind, then answered, my son wanted this land because he thought it could make him rich. I kept it exactly what it was always meant to be, a home.